Enjoy with your headphones for a better listening experience.
Please watch till the end of the video to have the most scariest part of the story.
I'm stuck on Earth and looking for a job, help. Hello, Reddit. Long-time lurker, first-time poster. I inhabit a female human body aged 26. I suppose you can call me Eva. I fell to Earth 5 years ago. I don't know how to describe what I was before. I was one of many, part of an entirely distinct species that couldn't be farther from what you as the human race are familiar with. Whatever we were, whatever I was, we're all gone now. I'm the sole survivor, all that's left of the world I used to be a part of. And I'm not even myself anymore. There was something big. After all these years, I still know what it looks like. I can still see it move and hear its voice in my head. I keep having nightmares of it. I'm unsure if my imagination has distorted or diluted these memories, but it cannot have changed them too much. The creature has no name. It's of unfathomable size, with a maw big enough to fit planets, dimensions. Like mine. One day, without warning, it appeared in the sky above us. We didn't know what it was, we had never seen anything like it. It was absurdity itself, impossible, indescribable, and yet there. It simply showed up out of nowhere, taking up the entirety of the heavens with its size. It seemed to swallow all the light. Shortly before it devoured us, it made a noise that echoed like a never-ending thunderclap. That's when we knew we were going to die. I remember the breeders throwing their bodies over those of their larvae, the need to protect their young ever present despite its futility. The being opened its mouth, and our world was plunged into darkness. I remember the wails and the weeping. I remember my own fear. I had seen the end of all things, the end of life the way I knew it, and I thought it would be the end of me, as well. In fact, I'd been sure of it. It shattered me. It shattered my physical form and sent its remains crumbling down to earth. I have no idea how I made it out. I must have teleported across some kind of border, by whatever unnatural means, or heavenly being's good graces. In this dimension, here, I fell through the sky one day. I would go on to learn that it had happened during a solar eclipse. I remember my rapid descent, a power pulling me from my dimension into this one and then down, 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 my first contact with what I'd come to know as gravity. I was already torn asunder, bits and pieces of my mangled, once magnificent body all falling in a whirl of pain and panic. Then something unexpected happened. This force that was dragging me to the ground was growing stronger and stronger. It started crushing me, actually crushing me. All my broken limbs, tendrils, and random chunks of mass were squeezed together like a bunch of berries being squeezed out in a fist. I was being compressed, reshaped into a tiny, fleshy, pink form, a sack of meat, a body that could break when bent. It was pure, true agony, unlike anything I'd felt before or have since. The impact was less horrific than the transformation, but it hurt immensely, nevertheless. My mind was swimming, vision blurring as I threw one last glance at the sky of a dimension I didn't know, a sun shrouded in shadow. I opened the thing that was now my mouth to release a single, long, drawn-out cry of anguish and despair, what I thought would be the final sound I'd ever utter. But it just kept going and going. I wasn't dead. That's when I realized it. I was not dead. What followed were some of the most confusing, terrifying hours of my life. I had come crashing down on a plane full of a weird color I didn't know. Later, I'd go on to understand that the color was green and what I was seeing were trees and grass, but at the time, I was completely dazed and bewildered. I somehow started to move, flying did not work anymore, as my body had lost all that had formerly rendered it glorious. I crawled forth on my hands and knees, not knowing what else to do. I screamed and kept on screaming, but I was all by myself. My mind was racing. Where was I? What was I? Where had my body gone? Why was moving so hard? I fought my way forward, every little motion sending alien sensations through my body. I was in a horrified frenzy, unable to form a single helpful thought as I tried to adjust to what I was hearing and seeing. All those noises, the bright light, the fullness of it all. I was actually glad when the sky turned red and then black, relieving my strained eyes. I somehow got the idea to pull myself up and started stumbling around on two legs among the trees. I was beginning to calm down a little, figuring that since nothing had tried to kill me since my descent, wherever I couldn't be half bad. Sure, I was still utterly disturbed, but starting to get better, more, or less. I laboriously made my way out of the woods, now finding myself padding over hard gray asphalt. Looking around, I took note of the uneven, tall structures around me. A residential street, with houses on one side. Obviously, I had no idea what it was at the time. I stumbled onwards until I basically ran into a group of small creatures of comparable size and formed my own new body. Of course, I didn't want them to spot me, but by the time I had realized that I was facing a potential threat, it was too late to find a hiding spot. They'd already noticed me. They proceeded towards me, making noises that immediately struck me as abrasive. They surrounded me and began to touch my weak pink skin. For a moment, I was too confused to move. They were inflicting a new sensation. They were hitting me. It took me a while to understand and adjust to this change. I had never felt someone hitting me before. Pain bloomed on the vulnerable surface of my new body, that horrid fear I felt when being faced with the larger entity pushing itself back into the forefront of my mind. In this form, I was powerless. A cowering infant before a cruel father's belt. I couldn't defend myself. I didn't know how to use my arms and legs properly yet. So, I dropped. I was going to die. I knew it. I would be killed by a bunch of noisy little creatures. I think the shame almost outweighed the terror. I curled up on the hard ground, hugging my knees as these humans kicked and punched me. One of them tried to get on top of me, and I kept emitting screams in hopes for them to stop. They wouldn't let up, though, not until another voice cut through their chaos. A new person had joined us and was working on pulling them off of me. Despite this other human being alone, the gaggle was willing to obey and, to my great relief, scattered, running off in different directions. My savior human bent down and helped me to my feet again, offering cool and gentle sounds of comfort. I was hurting all over, and my first instinct was to flee and find cover again, but the human held me close and with such caution that I felt my pulse slow, and my nerves finally settle. My throat was still tight. I felt like I'd been gagged, but my shallow gasps for air were turning into steady intakes of breath once again. I looked at the human, and it looked back at me. I'm going to make this easier on any possible readers and describe my savior human and everything that followed using the full range of vocabulary I acquired during my stay on Earth. My savior human was a woman with deep brown skin, coiled black hair, and large, bright eyes. She smiled at me, and somehow, I felt that the right thing was to mimic the expression. She talked soothingly, asking me questions I couldn't understand or respond to. By that time, we had been joined by another human, who was talking into a small handheld device pressed up to her ear. I would later find out she'd called the police. Mere minutes later, the street was suddenly filled with the strangest lights. They were glaringly bright, unfamiliar colors, stinging my eyes as they drew closer. The sound they were accompanied by, however, was much worse. It was an unnatural, pulsing wail that penetrated my ears, sending throbbing waves of pain through my head. I thought my skull was about to burst. My flight instinct kicking in, I instantly sought to distance myself from the source of this sensorial torment. The soles of my bare feet drumming on the rough ground was painful, too, but secondary to whatever howling monstrosity was barreling towards me from behind. I ran, or rather, I attempted to, my new body straining to keep up with the pace I was trying to set. More noises rang out from behind me, shouts like those of warriors setting out on a hunt. Loud, heavy footsteps drew nearer, and before I knew it, I was being tackled from behind. My soft flesh offered no protection from the harsh asphalt, and I cried out when I felt the outermost layer of my thin pink skin being shredded by hundreds of minimal pebbles and protrusions. There was another one of these beings lying on top of me, a much bigger and wider one, and it weighed me down relentlessly. I felt the crunch of some small bone in my foot breaking, and fiery heat shot up the length of the sole. I shrieked, continuing to thrash around as the larger human pulled me up. He stuffed me into the back of the yelling machine with all the lights he'd emerged from, and under tears of pain and screams of terror and fury, I was being transported to a spacious building. As though all of this had not sufficed, what followed was somehow worse. There were multiple meat sacks, all talking over one another, shouting and blabbering at me, demanding that I answer questions I couldn't even understand. I didn't know their language. How was I supposed to tell them anything about myself? They were trying to make out an identity I didn't possess. I was nobody. To my surprise, my savior human, the lady who had smiled at me, ended up bursting into the station. She started talking as loud as all the others, but to them instead of me. I had no idea what she was saying, but I could hear her voice all the way in the other room, pleasing to the ear, despite its volume and harsh tone. She must have helped them realize the futility of their efforts, because they ended up bringing in other, special human authorities to talk with me. I liked those a lot better. They didn't ask too many questions, rather seeming like they already knew a lot somehow. In the end, they simply let me go. I went back to the home of my savior human. To her, I was immensely grateful. That was an entirely new feeling, and a debt I didn't know how to pay. I went hunting for her, but I only found these small gray furry creatures in the sewers. Rats, you know. She wasn't really happy about them, though. I still remember how loud she screamed when she found them on her table. That was the first thing I learned under her tutelage, not to kill trivial things anymore. It turned out that my savior human was actually what people call a kindergarten teacher, the folks who teach human larvae the alphabet, to count and complete other basic tasks. Some of the people in suits we were sent to talk to in the beginning would come by to check up on me while I lived with her. They paid her for imparting knowledge onto me. She later told me she was glad for the opportunity. It wasn't just the money, she explained. I really enjoyed it. You were so interesting, I wanted to know what was up with you. I knew it had to be crazy, what with the agents coming by and everything. Plus, you were, like, my most well-behaved student. My understanding of the human language English came relatively fast. Soon enough, I also understood the concept of names, and learned that my savior human was called Nettie Peterson. I developed a loving attachment to her. Nettie bestowed upon me the title of best friend, which I continue to bear with pride and joy. She knows my true nature and helps me keep the secret under wraps, and she's the one who came up with my name. Nettie owns a house she inherited from her biological makers, and for 3 years I stayed there with her. Her house is the nicest place imaginable. She used children's books to teach me how to read, with so-called fairy tales and related stories. I would picture the settings described like my savior's home. Her garden was an explosion of clashing colors, meticulously arranged to somehow not appear chaotic despite the enormous range of varying plant life on display there. After 3 years of living with Nettie, I decided to move out and get a job. No one told me how hard that was going to be. By now, it's actually necessary though, since the agents don't hand out money to Nettie and me anymore. There's this whole load of pressure on me now. A part of me wishes I could return to my home dimension, even though I know there's nothing left of it anymore. That thought hurts me a lot, more than I am eloquent enough to describe. Anyways, I worked as a delivery girl for a while. That made my enthusiasm about joining the workforce wane rather quickly. I was good at it though, fast, reliable, punctual, until some drunk idiot T-boned me. It wasn't even my fault, and it's a miracle I got away from it with all my organs intact. Still, for some reason it led to the restaurant I was driving to find out that I didn't have a license, and they fired me because they wanted to take on someone who did. Nettie always says I shouldn't curse, but I believe the situation warrants it. I have been looking for a new job ever since, and it has not been a rewarding search. I have been in a bad mood because of it for a long time now. Worse yet, finances are becoming a real problem since I'm basically supporting two people nowadays, myself and my deadbeat roommate. She's a whole other story, though. I really don't want to have to fall back on Nettie. She's obviously offered her support, kind, and caring soul that she is, but I just can't. It would be too sad, too humiliating, and I don't want to be a burden to her. Not again. That's why I've decided to post here to fish for ideas. Is there anything you all think I could do? Any particular place I should look? I do have some talents I suppose might be useful, but most of them have been perceived as unnerving in the past. I'm always a bit on the fence about startling people, and I'd appreciate any and all input. If any of you happen to be inhuman as well, I would be happy to chat. It would be nice to feel a little more connected. 2. Deadbeat roommate. I'm stuck on Earth and looking for a job. Also, I may have to support my deadbeat roommate in many ways. Hello, Reddit, this is Evangeline Shirley, still not native to the human world, still unemployed. This is about the roommate I mentioned in yesterday's post. I didn't plan to update this blog thread so soon, but I'm jobless and I've got nothing better to do. On top of that, something very surprising has happened, so here it is. 2 years ago, I met and moved in with a person by the name of Kit Sutton. She's my age, and at the time, she appeared to have a stable income. She seemed friendly and responsible enough, and since I was looking desperately for someone to share rent with, I didn't really think things over. We chose a ridiculously small, 2-bedroom apartment in an admittedly bad, but more affordable part of town. Our furniture consists of haggled-down old items mostly found on yard sales or the roadside. After all, one man's trash is another man's treasure, or so they say. Either way, things were going well at first. Rent was much cheaper divided in two, chores were completed in a turn-based system, and food and household purchases were shared. Apart from using the word actually in nearly every sentence, Kit seemed to be all right. Then she started showing her true colors, and things turned sour. I soon found out that my roommate was actually out of a job and had a habit of disappearing for days on end without so much as giving me a heads up. The definition of deadbeat. We actually hadn't seen each other in 2 weeks when I ran into her at Tom's Diner today. The diner is one of the places Nettie and I have come to frequent. The food there is cheap enough that even I can afford it. I'd been hoping to grab a quick bite, and lo and behold, there she was. Impossible to overlook with her dyed blue sidecut and baggy sportswear. The faded red of the booth she was sitting in clashed with the subdued black and gray of her crop top and sweatpants. There you are. I was hoping I'd catch you here. She rose to her feet upon taking note of me. I felt anger bubble up inside me. Coming to a halt, I crossed my arms in front of my chest, fixing her with an icy glare. Equal parts hoping and dreading, actually, she added, scratching the shaved side of her head. Kit Sutton, I said in a deep voice, deliberation weighing down each word. I paid rent this month. Alone. Speak. I'm sorry, okay? I had to leave in a hurry, something came up. What was it? You don't work, what was so important that you had to leave me to cover for you again? I mean it, I had to go. You wouldn't understand. But I'm sorry, I really am. And it won't happen again, I promise. Oh, you promise? Well, that changes everything. It's not often that I employ sarcasm. Most of the time, I don't really know how to use it. That particular situation simply seemed to call for it, though. Footsteps drew my attention, and I turned to find that the waiter had come up behind us. Everything all right? He asked. Briefly distracted and wanting to maintain decorum, I allowed Kit to pull me down onto the padded bench of her booth. We're fine, she assured him. We'll each have a chai latte, please. The waiter grinned, shaking his head. I don't think so. He'd vanished before Kit could protest, reappearing moments later to place a tall glass of coconut water in front of me. I smiled at him, and he winked. I go there a lot. Chai latte will be up in a minute, he told Kit over his shoulder as he marched off again. I took a quick, grateful sip before focusing on my roommate again. You have 10 seconds. Go. I got a call from an old friend of mine. I had to come and see them, they were in trouble. I shook my head. This is the 4th time you've done this. I've reached my limit. I'm at a point where I'm basically supporting you financially. You never even buy your own food anymore. I feel like I'm running a hotel, except if I was, I'd at least be getting money when you leave. Her face fell. No, Evangeline, please no, please don't throw me out. The 4th time. I know, but I'm not gonna do it again, I swear, she pleaded. I'll make it up to you. I've got some money right now, I can pay it up. And I'll find work, I'll figure something out, just give me one more shot. You've said that every time. It's exhausting. Kit hung her head, looking utterly crestfallen. I'm sorry. Can I at least come over one last time, pick up my stuff? Yes. Actually, can I take a bath there one last time? You can stay until you've found something else. I'll help you look. Also, I'll get back to you about the bills. You owe me, I reminded her. Yeah, I'm sorry. Oh no, I'm gonna miss the apartment. Gonna miss you. Don't try guilting me. You're barely around, I hardly know you at all, I deadpanned, downing the rest of my water as the waiter reappeared to bring Kit her drink. I wasn't, whatever. Is there anything at all I could say to change your mind? She wrapped her hands around her mug, black fingernails tapping the rim. I always liked you. I mean it. I wish you'd let me stay. I wish you'd pay the bills. But I really will. Just give me a chance to find something stable. It's not easy getting by on just gigs. And I would understand that if you weren't always so dodgy. I'm not going back and forth with you on this again. I rolled my shoulders, wishing the oncoming tension would go away. To put it plainly, I do not trust you. I think you can see why. I was fresh out of appetite, so we returned home on that note. Parting with Kit was more painful than expected, but I figured it was about time I set some boundaries. Nettie Peterson had always warned me about her. The two of them had met on a couple occasions and never really hit it off. My savior human was of the firm conviction that Kit was abusing my trust. In hindsight, she'd had a point. I don't know why I didn't act on her concerns sooner. Normally, I would jump to follow any and all advice my best friend gave me, but I guess I had simply grown accustomed to having Sutton around. She wasn't an unpleasant character by any means, charming, funny, entertaining. I liked her music, too. She played the guitar and sang, occasionally in the streets or on the plaza, with a hat on the ground in front of her. She'd happily accept any gigs that came her way. Whenever she was home, the apartment would be alive with her singing. I stifled a yawn as we walked. Written any new songs lately? My half-hearted attempt at conversation was met with more enthusiasm than necessary. Actually, yes. I haven't been able to make heads or tails of it yet, but I've got some new lyric bits that are gonna add up to something really cool, I think. The working title is Sewer Rat Parade. That is an intriguing title. You shouldn't change it. Right? I actually thought the same thing. Nettie Peterson says your music's weird, but I think she simply doesn't get it, I remarked. Nettie doesn't like my songs? Kit looked crestfallen. Don't worry. They're great. Whatever you do, I really hope you'll get famous someday. You should be. I don't know what allowed me to voice my thoughts like that, but despite the hard feelings, I figured she deserved some honest praise. She jumped into the bathtub as soon as we got home while I sat down on our rancid old couch and picked up a book Nettie had lent to me a little while ago. And of Green Gables. One of her classes was reading it and she decided I should, too, especially since she had named me after the main character. And Shirley, Evangeline Shirley. I have to say, I'm glad she came up with that. It is an absolutely lovely story. It somehow makes me wish I'd had my infancy stage on this planet, being cared for by human breeders. Their love seems so fragile and tender. Due to reasons unknown, I find myself yearning for that kind of devotion. It's the strangest thing, how can I miss something I've never known? So, there I sat, completely absorbed, when an ear-piercing scream tore me out of my reverie. I immediately jumped up and ran for the bathroom door. "Kit? Are you all right?" I bellowed. "Don't come in here," she yelled back, her voice muffled as if through gritted teeth. "Stay out." My fingers were trembling, so I clenched them into fists and started pounding on the door. "What's going on in there?" "I'm okay," Kit barked, the fear in her shrill tone betraying her words. "I can handle it." "Handle what?" No response. Just a low "oh shit, oh shit, oh shit" coming from the other side. "Kit?" I called out again, heart pounding like a sledgehammer. "Kit?" A choked gurgling rang out from inside. "Fuck this. I'm coming in," I shouted. With that, I threw open the door only to freeze mid-step through the frame. Kit was cowering at the far end of the bathtub, arms outstretched and clinging to the towel rail. Her face was bright red, tears gushing out of her eyes. There was something wrapped around her neck, something wet and disgusting that reminded me of a furry dirty blonde snake with blue streaks. For a beat, I only stared at it in horror. Then I realized it. It was an amalgamation of hair, our hair, all fused and mixed up into one long, animate rope born from the shower drain. One of its ends had snaked around my roommate's throat and was in the process of squeezing the air out of her while another two had shackled her ankles. I couldn't believe what I was seeing, and for a moment, I was almost paralyzed with fright. Considering my own inhuman nature, you'd think I would be less susceptible to such feelings of terror, but surprise. I'm not. The panic in Kit's eyes was raw, true, and palpable enough for me to snap out of it. Without thinking about it twice, I had sprung into action. I grabbed onto the hair rope, its moist squishiness sending chills up my spine as my face twisted into a grimace of revulsion and distress. I held my breath and pulled, tearing at the living restraints with all my might. My muscles straining, I held against the strength of the sewer hair, employing every last bit of my own until finally, it snapped. I was sent stumbling back and falling down on my behind, groaning in pain as I struggled to get back up. But it worked. Kit had climbed out of the tub and, clutching her throat, began staggering over to the door, gasping for air. She was looking at me with wide, horrified eyes. "Get the pipe cleaner," I shouted. She rasped out a sharp sound of affirmation and ran for the kitchen cupboard, naked feet rapidly slapping the linoleum floor. She returned within a few seconds, the bottle already unscrewed as she thrust it into my hands. I lunged at the writhing bits of hair snake squirming around in the bathtub and mercilessly poured the cleaning liquid out on top of them. They started struggling even harder, their movements growing frantic, before they fell limp and shrank away, disappearing down the drain. I stared at the tub, my chest heaving as my pulse finally began to slow. Once I had regained some semblance of composure, I dumped the rest of the pipe cleaner in after them. Dropping the bottle, I turned and sank down to sit on the side of the bathtub. Kit was standing in front of me, her lean, muscular body trembling even though she didn't seem to notice. She still had the same look of abject terror on her face as before, her blank stare fixing me while she stood just as motionless, not even moving to cover herself up. "Why are there tentacles coming out of your back?" she asked in a whisper. "Oh. You ripped that hair thing apart with them. They popped up when you came in." "Oops. Wait, I wasn't using my hands for that?" "No, Eva. You were using your back tentacles." I craned my neck to catch a glance at them, and sure enough, there they were. 4 of them, right there behind me, black and ooze-white and squirmy. Too bad about my shirt. They had torn right through it. I sighed, squeezing them back in. Excuse me. That's just a thing my body does sometimes. Oh. I see. She began stroking her arms nervously, before finally bending down to reach for the towel that was lying in a heap on the floor. May I ask why you were attacked by an amalgamation of our shower hair? I inquired. You seem to know something about that. She pursed her lips, nodding stiffly. I guess there's a lot the two of us don't know about each other. Kit? I gave up a lot to be the person I am today. I had to leave a lot of things behind, a lot of people. Some of them want me back. That's why I disappear sometimes. Her voice was soft and husky as she buried her face in the towel, drying off her shock of blue hair. Every time I make it back, it's honestly a bit of a surprise to me. Who's after you? It'd be much easier if you didn't know. Seems like you need me to, though. How am I supposed to protect you if I have no idea what from? I asked softly. Aren't you gonna throw me out anymore? I shook my head. You're in trouble. And Nettie says when people are in trouble, you're obligated to help them. Then I guess I'm glad she taught that to you. Slinging the towel over her shoulders, she gave me a shrug. No need to wear clothes in front of you anymore now, is there? Please do. It's weird. I know, Eva. Fuck. I need to go lie down. She stopped just short of passing the doorway. Hey, thank you. I owe you big time. Pay your bills. This spells trouble, no doubt. I have enough on my plate already, as the saying goes, but I'm not about to leave Kit Sutton, terrible roommate though she is, for what would surely be a cruel fate. Who knows what she's involved in, but I am rather set on finding out. Any advice is welcome. I for one don't know what to make of this. 3. Creepy crush. Stuck on Earth and looking for a job, everyone says my crush is creepy, and I'm starting to see why. During my stay here on Earth, I've made many fascinating discoveries. One of them is so-called diners, establishments where customers can sit down alone, in groups or pairs, to chat and be served a variety of meals and beverages. Nettie Peterson took me to one as soon as she deemed me well-spoken enough to appear in good society. There's Tom's Diner, the one I mentioned earlier. It's close to our places, and really cozy. We've been frequenting it ever since my debut. For the first 4 years, the head waitress there was a hearty, saccharine lady in her 40s. When she quit, I imagined that everything would go on as it was with the others filling in for her, but as Nettie always says, the only constant is change. The position was filled by a complete newcomer. I didn't take note of him right away the first time we met. He flitted around in between the tables, delivering trays, collecting money. When he took our orders, Nettie and I were in the middle of a conversation. She ordered for the both of us, so I didn't even look up at him. It was only when he came back with our beverages that I realized it. I stared at him as he handed Nettie her espresso. You're not the woman who normally brings us our drinks, I stated. He straightened up, raising a brow. Yes, I am, in fact, new here. And also, not a woman. This prompted me to take him in fully. He was of average height, the black apron hugging his slender torso in an unusually flattering manner. The many colorful pins on it added a creative, delicate touch. His jaw was steadily working away at a wad of chewing gum. Huh. Looking at him made me feel pleasantly odd, and that little huh was the only sound I found myself able to produce. The waiter frowned. Is that a problem? No. You're divine. Silence. I'm what now? He inquired, taken aback. Divine. I'm sorry if I'm expressing myself improperly, I mean to say I find you very attractive. Again, silence. He flattened the flurry of golden curls on his head with his palm. For real? Absolutely. The waiter let out a quiet, incredibly soft gasp of surprise that immediately formed into a smile, an expression that I have thus far found to be unique to this particular individual. It was incredibly endearing. He cleared his throat, gracefully bending over to place my glass of coconut water in front of me. Thanks. Thank you very much. He turned on his heel. Divine, I heard him mutter to himself as he walked off. Evangeline. Nettie's stern voice drew my attention and I shuddered under her scrutiny. You can't just say things like that to mean you don't know, she scolded quietly. Why not? First of all, it might make him uncomfortable. He's working here. He's probably not looking to get hit on. Besides, here, she lowered her voice, he looks creepy. Uncanny Valley-like. If you want to date someone, I'll pick you out a nice, handsome guy. Oh. Do you have to? Hey. I'm an excellent matchmaker. That's not what I want, I told her, frankly. I didn't mean to make the server uneasy, I simply meant to let him know that he struck me as winsome. She flicked me between the eyes, grinning indulgently. Anyways, he didn't seem displeased, she added. So why was it bad that I said that? It's a delicate matter, is all. I want you to be safe. You're not ready for that kind of thing. What kind of thing? Nettie sighed for a long time. That was my first encounter with the waiter. Knowing of his presence was admittedly part of the reason my visits to the diner became more frequent. Nettie complained about it often, but this was one thing I didn't want to take her advice on. My interactions with the server stayed mostly unremarkable. She took care of that. She invited herself along every time I went, and when the waiter came up to us, she'd look at him in the nastiest way. Yesterday, I ended up telling Kit Sutton about the server, though. Her reaction was quite different. We're talking about that really blonde guy, she inquired. Angel Curls? That's the one. She snorted. Seriously? I think he actually looks kinda creepy. That's exactly what Nettie said. Who knew? Actually, it doesn't matter what we think. If you like the guy, speak up. But I only ever see him when he's at work. Kit shrugged. You can tell him you'd like to talk sometime, what's the big deal? Right. What was the big deal? I headed to the diner earlier today, sat down at the usual booth, ordered some coconut water and pancakes, and when the waiter came back, hey, would you like to talk? The words were out of my mouth before I could reconsider. And before I could steady myself, he'd already sat down across from me. Sure, what about? In general. Okay, I've got time. He motioned at the mostly empty diner around us. The others can work, too, for once. What's up? Still think I'm divine? His lower jaw was eagerly moving up and down, repeatedly squashing his chewing gum. I noticed a hint of hesitation in his voice that contrasted with his casual tone. I do, I said steadfastly. He chuckled brightly. How's the job hunt going? Not well. How come you know about that? I overhear a lot of things. I figured you'd tune out the chatter in your line of work, I remarked. I do for the most part. He leaned forward, gazing warmly at me from behind thick lashes. But you're more interesting than most people. My neck grew hot. I am? You're not normal. I nearly coughed up my coconut water. How? Look, you don't need to tell me what you are. In fact, I prefer not knowing. But, if you might muster some sympathy, then maybe you could help me with something, as a fellow outsider. My heart rate slowed considerably, and I let go of a soft sigh. I held his gaze, trying to commit it to memory. Sure, I wasn't the savviest judge, but I wouldn't have thought him to be inhuman. Nothing about him registered as unsettling to me. What do you need? He moved to sit down right beside me, leaning close to my ear as he spoke. Someone's been following me. They wait for me when I leave work. I've managed to keep them from finding out where I live, but they're getting harder to shake off every day. I know them. Not personally, but I know they'll come for me soon. If they get me, I'll disappear. Disappear? I echoed. His face had turned an odd kind of neutral. They're not gonna let me live. He inched even closer still. So, there's something unnatural about you. I don't mind. It's really interesting, actually. That's the second time you've called me that. His shoulder brushed against mine as he shrugged. Can you blame me? Kind of, my voice broke and I had to turn my burning face away to start over. Kind of sounds like you only want me to be your bodyguard. He sighed, lowering his head. I'm sorry I sprung this onto you. I wasn't sure I should ask at all. Since you said you wanted to talk, I just took that as a sign, I guess. Forget I said anything. Why? I'll help you. Of course, I'll help. I was just wondering if you'd ever want to get to know each other beyond that. He did that thing again, the really low, soft gasp that turned into a smile. Yes, he said with a nod. I would. I grinned then, brightly. He held my gaze. This is the first time I've seen you smile. I was wondering what that looks like, he remarked, his tone calculative and faintly astounded. You're secretly just a little ball of sunshine, aren't you? I shrugged. When there's a reason to be. So, these people, what can you tell me about them? I asked. It's someone different almost every time, but it's, like, this one group. They never directly approach me in public, which is how I've managed to lose them up until now. They've been leaving these notes here for me, though. I found this one today. He reached into his apron pocket and produced a red piece of paper that looked like it had been torn from some kind of advertisement brochure. The words, "Come home," or "We'll take you," were written on it in thick black marker. It's always something like that. Don't ask, it makes sense with the situation I'm in. I won't, I assured him. Keep your secrets. You're saying they'd be willing to hurt you? If they're willing to kidnap me, then yeah. Probably. That's why I need you to scare them off. Get up in their faces, and be frightened. What makes you think I can do that? Come on, be honest, you're totally hiding fangs or claws or something, aren't you? He smirked excitedly, gum squeaking between his teeth. Something like that. It should be enough to make them leave you alone. Wonderful. Then will you meet me here at 6? That's when I get off. They're probably gonna be here by then. I promised I would, and I stuck to it. When I returned to Tom's diner, the server had already put on his coat and was waiting for me outside of the building. When we got on the bus, I noticed he was decidedly more anxious than he'd been during our conversation a couple of hours ago. He kept looking over his shoulder and fidgeting with his gum, using the tip of his finger to pull sticky pink strings from his mouth, before letting them snap back in. The real issue, however, was that the people he'd told me about didn't appear. We kept both our eyes open during the bus ride, but nobody was following us. This only seemed to make the waiter even more uneasy. Something's wrong, he kept telling me under his breath. But you got to believe me, there's someone after me all the time, normally. I assured him I did believe him, but we nevertheless arrived at his apartment without spotting anything strange. He seemed to be unsure whether to be relieved or unsettled by that. I offered to stay a while, but he told me he'd be all right. I gave him my phone number in case anything else happened, with the promise that we'd do the same thing tomorrow. This seemed to soothe his nerves considerably, and he saw me off with the same ready smile I had become accustomed to. I returned home to find Kit typing away on her dingy old laptop. She was sending out application emails left and right, apparently eager to keep her promise. We looked through job offerings around town. Turns out they were searching for lifeguards to work at the beach again in the summer. Actually, not a bad job when you think about it, my roommate pondered. I'd get to work on my tan and look at pretty girls all day. Too bad I'm deathly afraid of the ocean. Really? She smiled thinly. The ocean and I aren't on speaking terms at the moment. What about you? I can't swim. We both jumped at the shrill sound of my phone ringing. I hastened to pick it up, unknown number. The waiter. It was the first thought that entered my mind. I answered the call, holding the phone up to my ear with trembling fingers. Hello? I breathed. No response. I could notice a deep voice talking in the background, only snippets of speech reaching my ear. Little shit, think we'd let, factory. My blood froze. I ended the call and tossed the phone aside. Something's wrong. I need your car, I told Kit, biting down on my quivering lips. I should have never left him alone. She looked at me, her bright eyes wide and startled. It took her merely a moment to spring into action, grabbing her jacket and fumbling out her keys. I'm coming with you, she announced breathily. There was no time to argue. We ran down the stairs, bursting outside and hopping into her beat-up station wagon. Directions. Kit bellowed as she stepped on the gas. I did my best to navigate with her through the streets, my memory serving me right as we thankfully ended up outside the waiter's building. I ordered Kit to stay behind as I dashed to the front door. I pressed my open palm against the tableau of doorbells, ringing every last one until finally, some unit buzzed me in. I sprinted up the stairs, taking 2 steps at once until I reached the entrance to the waiter's apartment. The door was ajar. There wasn't a single sound coming from inside, only an eerie white glow. I stopped in my tracks, straining to listen for anything at all. A low static hum reached my ears, not unlike that of a TV. I could feel my heart thumping, blood rushing to my head. I knew there had to be something behind that door I did not want to see, something that would undoubtedly add to my nightmares. I pushed the thoughts aside, allowing my eyes to fall shut for only a second as I took the last step to cross the threshold. I walked down the same little hallway I'd glimpsed before when I'd said goodbye to the waiter. Silently placing one foot in front of the other, I made my way over to the door that lay ahead. It, too, was open just a crack, unnatural light falling through. My pulse sped up further, dread oozing into every limb. I stopped just in front of the entrance and slid off my sweater, letting it fall to the floor as the 4 tentacles began to unfurl on my back. When I nudged the door, it swung open with a soft creak, giving way to a sight that caused me to freeze mid-motion. The room in front of me was bathed in the pale glow of the TV screen, its deep hum droning in my ears like a distant siren. However, my gaze was instantly drawn to the 2 people in the very middle of the room. The waiter was lying sprawled out on the floor, his golden curls spread around his head like a halo. His eyes were wide open and unreactive, his face expressionless. He was staring at the ceiling, his features empty and absent. My breath caught in my throat, a pang of terror twisting my guts. Even without stepping any closer, even without checking his pulse or his breathing, I could tell that I was not looking at a living thing anymore. Through the sound of my pulse thrumming, I directed my blurry gaze at the person leaning over him. It was a man. He was crouching on the floor, between the waiter's legs. He had rolled up his shirt and was fiddling around with his stomach. Completely absorbed in his morbid handiwork, he didn't notice as I inched forward, squinting to make it what he was doing. His fingers were dancing across the server's skin in strange patterns, and then, all of a sudden, he peeled it aside. I have no idea how I managed not to scream, not to gag or throw up on the spot. Instead, I stood still as a statue, numb with fear and nausea. I didn't know why I let it happen. Part of me simply had to see what he was doing. The man's fingers slid into the waiter's body, causing a revolting, wet squeaking noise as he pushed the flesh and muscle tissue aside. I winced. Were insides supposed to sound like that? With a frustrated sigh, the stranger withdrew his fingers from the corpse and flattened the flayed patch of skin back against the server's stomach. He then lifted the other man's limp arm and brought it up to his face. Picking up a scalpel, he cut up a large flap of skin from his wrist. He was just about to peel it back with the same surgical precision when my body finally broke out of its rigor, and I lunged. The man, now alerted to my presence, let out a blood-curdling scream, but he caught himself pretty quickly. He evaded my grasp, stumbling back and reaching for his side. "Stay the fuck away from me." "Whatever you are," he barked, drawing something I realized too late was a gun. "Who are you?" I yelled out, reaching for the weapon with arms and tentacles alike. He fired. A blinding pain tore into my shoulder and I shrieked. Flying into a panicked frenzy, I employed a very particular combat strategy. I began thrashing around wildly, hitting everything within reach. One of my tentacles whipped the gun out of the stranger's hand, and when he scrambled to retrieve it as it skittered across the floor, I pounced on him. Grabbing onto both sides of his head, I twisted his neck, pulling wildly until I heard a loud, sickening snap. The body beneath me fell limp and I rolled off, tears stinging my vision as I clutched the dripping warmth of my shoulder. Blood was running freely down my chest, pooling in the hollow palm I helplessly pressed over the wound. There was so much red. And that's when I realized something. I slowly turned my head to look at the waiter and his mangled arm and stomach. They weren't bleeding. That was the last thing I saw before passing out. I woke up back home, lying on my couch, a familiar, blue-framed face regarding me in concern. A smile of relief crossed her features as I met her gaze. I let out a drawn-out moan, pushing myself into a sitting position. My shoulder was throbbing, but it wasn't half as bad anymore. Glancing down at it, I found that a thick white bandage had been neatly wrapped around it, the tissue pristine and softer than cotton. "You patched me up," I stated. I didn't, actually. It was him. My jaw dropped. "The waiter?" "Yeah. I was waiting in the car for, 20 minutes, and then he came down and loaded you in. That guy is stronger than he looks." He didn't say anything, though. "What happened up there?" My throat worked. "I don't think you ought to know." "Actually, I'm pretty sure I should. I was really freaked out, and now you've got that 1,000-yard stare going on." After a minute, I tuned out her well-meaning chatter. Truth be told, I have no idea what to make of this. I don't think I'm going to swing by the diner today.
Thanks for watching. Please comment, like, share and subscribe. The Internet Surfer on YouTube for more horror and scary stories.